All right, if you've been following my big Marshall knife exploration videos, recently you might have noticed I've kind of stepped away from cold steel products. Unthinkable, I know, but Condor knives have come highly recommended. And recently I did a review of this Hudson Bay, which I selected because of its potential resemblance to the actual knife that Jim Bowie had on him during the infamous sandbar fight. Basically where it all started. And there's a lot that I like about this design, but I did mention a few things, potential shortcomings for me, at least in the way that I employ tools like this. So I was thinking, all right, if I evolve this forward along the lines that I prefer, might this then turn into the Moonshiner? Let's talk about the out-of-the-box edge. Now this is 1075 high carbon steel that my test files are putting somewhere between 50 and 55 HRC. So a bit soft for a knife, kind of more in the sword range, but I think this one's designed to be, well, more like a heavy chopper. So we'll see how the edge holds up. But basically flat ground profile with a pretty wide secondary edge bevel that's kind of apple-seated. Now that back edge is just a swedge, but it does have potential to be sharpened fairly readily, and it's probably something I'm going to do. Now, sort of shaving sharp out of the box, but showing up on camera, that secondary bevel, like the Hudson Bay, is really coarse. Like they used a pretty low grit to finish it off. So I expect toothy. Could it be improved? Well, we're also going to check that out. But against paper, okay, that is actually really slicey. That is better than the Hudson Bay did. Let's try some cardboard. Yeah, okay. Definitely a better edge than the Hudson Bay. If you've seen my video on the Hudson Bay, when we talk about the sheaths, there's going to be a lot of repetition. They're both made out of nice, thick, high-quality leather, well put together. They both have swiveling belt loops that I will talk about again in the carry and handling section. And they both ride in there with their grips about halfway into the sheath. Now, there is a bit of a different shape between each one. The Hudson Bay is a lot simpler. There's a lot more shape and character, I think, to the Moonshiner, which is, for me, visually more appealing. But the biggest difference comes in one of the complaints I had with the Hudson Bay. Given the shape of the grip, the length of the grip, I don't have a lot of real estate to grab onto for what's exposed here, and the shape of the butt end does not grab my hand back. So I mentioned, yeah, I do kind of fumble with trying to get a positive draw. The Moonshiner has corrected those things. I've got more length and this nice hook on the butt end that grab my hand back. So yeah, drawing very positive. However, there is one downside to this grip shape when it comes to the sheath. As I mentioned, the sheath and the blade are shipped wrapped separately in the box. So there's some break-in, especially getting that grip to fit halfway down into the leather. Now, with the Hudson Bay, because the grip is so narrow and rounded at the top, it wasn't much of a struggle. I do have some retention that I am concerned is going to loosen up with a break-in. But given how wide the top of the grip is on the Moonshiner, and yes, the top edges are kind of squared off, it is, at least initially, kind of a wiggly struggle to get it in. And the upside of that is retention is even more secure, and I expect it will continue to stay secure with break-in. Let's talk about specs, build quality, fit finish, and yes, I am going to make comparisons to the Hudson Bay. Side by side, you can definitely see size difference in blade, specifically length difference, not so much width or thickness, and significant difference in the size and shape of the grip. But price on both is actually about the same. I picked this up at Amazon for about $77 US. It's about the same price at Chicago Knife Works. I'll put some links in the description below. So keep those numbers in mind going forward. Not a huge investment to try out a new knife from a new maker. But, all right, talked a little bit about that edge in that out-of-the-box cutting. It's got a flat grind. It's got pretty wide secondary bevel that's apple-seated, 1075 high carbon steel that my test files are saying are somewhere between 50 and 55 HRC. Between the steel and the hardness, I have a lot of through-hardened swords that are in that range, but that seems potentially a little bit soft for a knife. But this is a knife that's designed to be a heavy chopper, so I'm going to put it through some durability tests and see how it turns out. Now, you might see in the light that there are a couple of scratches on it. That's from me already trying a few things like striking a ferro rod or something. So yeah, it's not a very hard, resilient piece of steel, I can tell you that already. And we'll see how it holds up in my tests. But does have a swedge on the back that would be fairly easy to make into a back edge if you're going to be using the knife that way. I may just leave it as is, given the profile being more of a drop point versus a clip point. That swedge might just be functional for improving its thrusting capability, and I am going to test it before I do anything about that back edge at all. Speaking of anything about that back edge at all, also don't think I need to do anything to the grip. You've certainly heard me whinge on about how much I hate big, square, chunky, blocky grips. This one is really nicely rounded everywhere. Another knife I would definitely make some comparisons with going forward would be the Becker BK9. Very similar size, blade shape, and even grip shape in certain ways. This is about half the price of that BK9, depending on where you're getting it. And if you watch my video on my complaints about the Beckers, this at least addresses all of them. The one place I don't think it would measure up would be in the hardness and quality of build of the blade itself. But we'll see how functional this is for, well, being a much cheaper knife made out of a different material and a different hardness. All right, back on subject. Unlike the Hudson Bay, it is basically just kind of a brushed finish. We'll see how that holds up. I may just go ahead, you know me and my shiny carbon steel knives. I have a tendency to go ahead and patina or blue them. I'm probably going to do that here. Spoiler alert. But your blade length is 9 inches, so about 23 centimeters. That makes it half an inch longer than the Hudson Bay. Even though this looks a lot bigger, it's only functionally half an inch bigger. Blade width is actually a shade narrower at pretty uniform 2 inches, about 5 centimeters. So 23 centimeters long, 2 wide, the same 5 millimeter thickness, no distal taper at the spine. Now grip length, I'm going to measure between these two hooks as being 5 inches. So 12.5 centimeters. That's, for me, with medium width hands, it's pretty generous for choking up or choking down. And you have that wonderful hook here at the bottom to grab your hand and lock in for chopping so you're not going to slip off. Also, the top end in that hook is also very rounded, so I'm not anticipating any uncomfortable collisions when I'm thrusting. We'll see how grippy it is under those different kinds of impacts. All right, your overall length, therefore, is 14 3/4 inches, so about 37.5 centimeters. Your weight, it's a couple of ounces heavier than Hudson Bay at 18 ounces, about 510 grams. Point of balance, though, because you got more handle, probably handle length and mass down here. Point of balance on Hudson Bay was further forward. This one is sitting at, well, half an inch, just barely ahead of the guard, a centimeter. So that does make it feel, between the balance and the grip mechanics, a whole lot different. We will absolutely talk about that in handling, but first, let me run my durability and impact tests, and we'll see how it does. All right, post-tests, how did it do? But first, caveat as always, if you're looking for hard bushcraft use tests, it's not something you're going to see on my channel. It's not what I do. Hopefully I can give you the collector's and the martial practitioner's perspective. But a lot of YouTubers have put this knife through really hard bushcraft testing, and it's held up just fine. Now I am going to do some comparisons between this, yes, and the Hudson Bay. And, well, here's a bit of a spoiler, is by the time I got around to doing the tests, I had both of these in hand, so I did them side by side, which was a very interesting experience. So how did that go? Well, reflect back on the review I did on the Hudson Bay for those results, but I'll summarize them here. First test, thrusting into my pel, stab him. Multiple layers of thick cardboard over a couple of inches of compressed brown paper bag paper over wood. Okay. I had some issues with the Hudson Bay in terms of that slippy grip and my hands slamming into the base of the blade here and pretty much any grip I could conceive of. This grip is not only much more grippy for me, given the way you've got that nice little palm swell working for you, but also this nice smooth rounded ramp for your hand to collide with. Yeah, much, much more pleasant. Also has a keener tip, so I was getting better penetration. And I mentioned that the Hudson Bay was like stabbing with a sharpened shovel. Okay, this is a much pointier sharpened shovel. It made some massive holes in my poor pel. So yeah, I'm going to have to resurface it yet again after that test. But yeah, really impressive in thrusting, stabbing, forward grip, reverse grip. All right, next test. Some people consider it a bit abusive, hacking and slashing, chopping into a piece of hard bamboo. But I am looking for a fragile edge. Can I easily induce a chip or a roll? And the answer is not at all. Edge held up really well. Took it to shaving, carving some hardwood boards, worked really well as a tool. Very comfortable in hand. Actually, believe it or not, a bit more comfortable than the Hudson Bay, at least in my hands. Chopped into the boards. Fantastic chopper. Felt great. Took no damage. Nothing loosened up. No damage to the edge. A little bit of scuffing on the finish, but it easily kind of buffed out. You might see a little bit there. Did some batoning. Did really good batoning through some kiln-dried firewood. Then a couple of tests that you didn't get to see, I did them off camera. I had a bunch of cardboard boxes to cut into target size sections for my upcoming side-by-side tests, and I figured I'd do a little preliminary testing with about a handful of knives that I'm currently testing. That also included this one, and well, this one didn't do very well, at least not with the factory edge. This one, even with the factory edge, did really, really well. And then I went ahead and improved it a bit on some really fine sanding belts. I did some more cardboard. Yeah, it did really well. It was actually one of the better slicers in that lot, and I'll get back to that when we talk about the side-by-side videos here, so stay tuned. But another test you didn't get to see. I figured given the shape of this one and this one, okay, side-by-side food preparation. And they both actually worked pretty well, and I did already improve, clean up the edge before I did that. Now this one, though, a bit more slicey than this one. I had to do some angle adjustment when I was doing some like fine vegetable slicing. This one works, I think, a little bit better as a cleaver and a butcher knife than this one does, but as an overall prep knife, very, very good. Now, one thing I don't think I mentioned when I was talking about fit and finish in this one as compared to the Hudson Bay, and it's a minor nitpick, but I did pick up on another YouTuber pointing this out. I think these walnut scales are prone to a tad bit of shrinkage, depending on where you happen to be. The exposed tang all the way around, I can feel the edges of just barely. It's not enough to create a hot spot. It's maybe less than a hair's thickness of exposure uniformly all the way around. But I'm going to say, at least in the testing that I did, the clear winner, this one. So let's go ahead and talk about martial handling. Quick update. When I went to patina the blade, the bluing solution would not take on that non-stainless high-carbon steel except for where the blade was scratched. And I realized I was getting some unusual stickiness for bare steel going through certain binding materials like cardboard and, yes, batoning through that log. So I think they coated the blade in some sort of pretty durable clear coat. And I had a heck of a time stripping it off. One, because, yeah, it was pretty durable, and two, because, well, I couldn't really see what I was doing because I couldn't see the finish. It took a couple of tries to get most of it off, and that was also hampered by the fact I couldn't get the handle scales off. So I did the best I could, and then instead of going for the full black Nazgul Sith Lord treatment, I just kind of grayed, gunmetaled the blade, gave it a little antiquing, a little age, a little character, but just wanted you to know that bare steel was treated with something to protect it. And that's actually where all the scratches were. Once I got that finish off, all those scratches I had incurred disappeared. So I think the steel itself is indeed pretty durable. Let's get on to handling. Down to the unflattering waistline view again for a quick discussion of carry. I'm going to repeat a lot of what I said about the Hudson Bay in terms of how much I like this sheath versus not liking dangly, floppy, low-hanging sheaths. My preference is for something that rides a bit higher, firm to my waist, not only so I can find it consistently, but also so I have something to pull against in a draw. And this one gives the best of both worlds. Rotation allows this longer knife to get out of my way as I sit down, which obviously I like to do a lot. But compensates for, well, lack of one of my preferences. I could wear this on either side, obviously, but right now we've got strong side, and my preference for strong side, if possible, is to wear it edge forward. The sheath doesn't give me that option, but the options it does give me. That rotation, and I do have a lot more to grab onto than I have with the Hudson Bay, and that hook on the end to be able to find it, rotate it backwards, and do a reasonably smooth draw without taking my arm too far behind me. Now, my old arthritic shoulders do struggle with trying to put it away like that. And yes, it is still a bit of a wiggle to get it into the sheath, even with some break-in having happened between when I started filming. But the other options are also still in play that were in play for that Hudson Bay. It's a little bit easier for me to get a cavalry draw on, and because there isn't that widening of the belly near the tip, I'm not getting the snag I often get if I'm not getting that clean draw. So it does draw a lot smoother. I've also obviously got reverse grip where I can just hook my hand into, well, the hook and do a pretty smooth draw for close quarters. Now it is coming out edge towards me, so I'm either going to have to use it this way in a pinch or flip it. And I'm going to say as we get into handling, here's a spoiler, that hook is something you need to work around in the pinch flip. But let's go ahead and talk about handling once deployed. I am definitely going to be doing side-by-side big knife comparisons going forward, but there are a couple of comparisons I have to make here regarding the Marshall handling of this knife. First comparison, obviously, Hudson Bay. Hudson Bay's video, I talked about the things I really liked about it, comfort in the hand, comfort moving it around, but the drawbacks, yeah, it's not a very secure grip, not a very long grip, and tip very wide, not maximized for penetration. I talked about my extremes of tip geometry, the needle versus the shovel. One maximized for penetration, the other one for impact. Depending on how you use a Marshall tool and what you prefer, it's going to be some balance of the two, but I've certainly worked with a lot of Marshall blades that were shovels, not designed for penetration, but you could still use the tip. This one, though, yeah, you've got more penetration capacity with the tip. It did an awesome job against my Pell, and when it comes to big Marshall knives with broad blades, going forward, we're going to definitely talk about the effectiveness of the wound channel. But for now, that's all I have to say. I don't know how much I can get away with and still keep the magic green dollar sign with YouTube. but also corrects all the issues I had with the grip. Very secure, very grippy, protects my hand from impact in thrusting and stabbing, a lot less risk of it slipping off the other end, and it does give me the extremes of the mechanics in the grip. I can choke all the way up on it and hook my thumb over it. Yes, I did round those corners off a little bit, not only for comfort, but for ease and resheathing. So for some of that close work, not only utility-wise, but for closer slashing, chopping, stabbing, I can get that secure grip. I could also choke all the way down for that reach and leverage in the snap cutting mechanic, though the balance of the knife just doesn't feel as good as having my hand like right in the middle of that swell. So, blade mass and geometry for hewing, cuts, chopping, slashing, really nice. It does kind of cross the line over into being a short sword that way. For the quicker snap cutting, okay, it's a little bit massive and chunky to make it the most nimble knife in my collection for doing that, but I could do it. Speaking of mass and blade geometry and grip geometry, we also have to make another comparison. Becker BK9, similar length, similar blade shape, very similar grip shape, but I've never connected to the Becker. And I did a video on the 4 things I hate about the Beckers and the 1 thing I love. The 1 thing I love, the quality of the blade steel. And then the 4 things I don't like. The grip, the sheath, the finish, the price. Okay. This fixes all 4 things that I hated. Now, it doesn't necessarily have the better steel or the more refined blade. But as everything else. And because of that, even though they're very similar in size, weight, and shape, I really like having this one in hand, moving it around, using it for a variety of tasks, versus the Becker that I just don't prefer to pick up, well, pretty much at all anymore. So that might be some confirmation bias because it does have more of the features I like. Is that influencing how it feels in my hand? I don't know, maybe. But speaking of which, you've got enough length and mass that, yeah, you could potentially use this as a parrying device, but it just doesn't have any hand protection. So my tactics are probably going to be more about evasion, counter-cutting, counter-slashing, counter-thrusting, and relying on whatever my offhand is doing for that more defensive enhancement, or this could be the offhand implement for close quarters versus something that's got longer reach and more parrying potential in my strong hand. We'll talk about those options going forward. But blade mass also gives me, well, authority for, if I did sharpen that, back cutting is possible, striking with the spine, striking with the flat. For some of those actions where you strike quickly with the flat. Also, got enough exposed here to use butt end of the weapon as an impact tool. The grip is going to keep my hand put. It's got enough of a leading edge that I feel like I can punch with it. What about the reverse grip? Okay, it's got enough of a kind of recessed in-cut right here that I can get purchase from a patented finger twirl, which I don't recommend because it's not very secure, but I do fall back on it a lot because I've been doing it forever. What about pinch flipping? Okay, mentioned a bit of a warning. Yes, you do have a taper here. That's a great place to index for pinch flipping, but that hook gets in my way sometimes. I've got short, stubby fingers, so sometimes my hand runs into it. In certain orientations, more so than others. Yeah, the hook just wants to catch my hand and try to throw the knife out of my hand, which is really not a good thing at all. So I'm reluctant to flip it around. So transitioning forward grip to reverse grip is probably going to be either two-handed action, or I'm just going to simply have to commit and keep it in the one grip until I have time to comfortably just switch it back and forth. Especially under adrenaline, where your fine motor skills, they just tend to go away. But in the reverse grip, yeah, I've got enough blade length and mass that I could use it as a shield in a pinch. That belly is really great for slashing, and yeah, tip penetration in this grip was phenomenal. All right, let's cut this off here. We will be doing more tests and comparisons going forward. If you have any questions about this knife, if you have this knife, if you have other Condor products you would like to recommend to me, any other big knives you'd like to recommend, please do. Otherwise, as always, thanks for watching, following my journey, subscribing to the channel, liking the videos, and I hope to see you back for wherever this is going.